secure. And here's Dave Ramseys' response to that.
Do you agree? Absolutely do not agree. As a matter of fact, neither does Visa or MasterCard. If you were to go to Visa's website, you can find very quickly and easily under the security section that they have a zero liability policy for fraud or online theft or identity theft for credit cards and debit cards.
That is the principle of his argument there. Now, he says that they have the same security by Visa, the debit card and credit card do. Now, let me go to the website and we can look it up ourselves. He's correct on this, that the protections for the Visa debit card are very similar. They're about the same as a credit card. That Visa's zero liability policy, which protects from unauthorized charges, any funds taken from your account due to a fraudulent use will be returned to your card. Now, the issue with this is there's more to it than that. There's the insurance side of it, which you're just banking on insurance to work. But in my mind, insurance should be the last result. You shouldn't be looking for insurance as the go-to to protect you. That's like saying, I have my house, but I don't need fire extinguisher or smoke detectors. I got insurance, right? Insurance should be the last line. That should be after other things have failed. And the problem is when you have a debit card, what you're doing is you're giving somebody direct access to your money. When you have a credit card, you're giving somebody direct access to someone else's money, not your money. So to say that it doesn't pose any more risk to you to give them your debit card over a credit card is just patently false. One of them definitely has more risk to it, and that's a debit card. Now, you might say, okay, well, he says later on in this video, I'm not going to play it, but he says later on in this same video that the most you'll ever be out the money if it's fraudulently charged from your debit card is just 2 or 3 days. And then the bank will go through, they're required by the insurance to put it back and it'll all be gravy, right? And you can go without a little money in your bank account for a couple days. Now with the credit card, there's a benefit. You don't have to go without that money for any amount of time because it's not your money being stolen. But let's just take that claim alone, that you'll only be out a couple days. And let's watch this news report here.
Camden Copeland says someone hacked her debit card last August while she was in South Africa on a teaching fellowship. But 5 months later, she still cannot get her bank to cover the loss.
You just hear what he said? She was out on a trip. Someone hacked her debit card. They racked up $2,000 in charges, and 5 months later, they still can't get the money back. Let's just watch a little bit more of this.
Most of us probably use our debit cards without thinking twice. That was certainly the case for Camden Copeland.
I was out for pizza and wine with some friends, and I tried and use my card, and it was denied, and I thought, this doesn't make any sense.
When she checked her bank account, she found this: more than $2,000 in bogus charges from bars, restaurants, and stores throughout South Africa, where she was working at the time. Her bank account emptied. The first thing she did was call Citizens Bank to report the fraud. Then she called her mom, Valerie Copeland, in Pittsburgh. Her reaction:
oh my gosh, my kid's over there without any money. What is she going to do?
The next day, she went to her local Citizens Bank branch and they referred the case to fraud investigators. But it took 3 months for her to learn the claim was denied.
And I said, what do you mean they're denying my claim? You have FDIC. This, it's only $2,000. You're $1 billion institution. You give this kid her money.
Citizens Bank.
Now, again, here's an example of a girl that went on a trip. Her debit card got stolen. She put in a claim, not 2 to 3 days like Dave Ramsey said. It's been 3 months and then they denied the claim. And this isn't a super once in a lifetime thing that happened to this girl. I can search in and find tons of examples of this, of people having their claims denied. The biggest issue with the debit card versus credit card analogy that Dave misses out is that insurance is great in writing, but what happens when they don't honor it? And the fact is, one of them you are linking to your money, one of them you're linking to someone else's money. With a credit card, I have a time period where I can go through, and before even deciding to pay for it, I can go through and validate every single purchase. If there's one of them that is fraudulent, which has happened before, I simply go through, file a dispute on that charge, and I tell the credit card company I'm not paying it. I can turn off auto pay. Tell them I'm not paying for this. And that's their money. They have to deal with it. I still have all of my money in that situation. You lose a lot of that power and control when you do it with a debit card. Now, granted, I mean, this is his whole thing. He can't really advertise any kind of product or go with any kind of product that gets people into debt. And if his argument was, well, yeah, the debit card might be a little bit worse with security, but the fact that you don't rack up debt and it controls your spending, that far outweighs any of the unlikely security concerns, right? He's not saying that though. He's just saying, he's trying to equivocate the two, that they're the totally same security-wise, that one doesn't make you any more vulnerable to the other. That's not true. Now, let's move on to the next one. The next one I think is a little bit less black and white. I still think he's wrong on it, and I'll show you why. This is like the age-old argument of whether it's good to pay off your mortgage early or to invest. Now, with Dave, of course, the whole idea is to get down on your debt. The problem is he's fighting with math here, and he has a hard time justifying this one because there's so much data, so much that says that investing over a 30-year period will have so much better returns than paying down your house early. Now, even his own website, let's check this out. I found this on his own blog. He has a blog post, and this is the Dave Ramsey website, Pay Off Your Mortgage or Save for Retirement. Let me go through the scenario of two different people. There's Joe, homeowner, and Jane, homeowner, and each of them take two different paths. One of them decides to invest, one of them decides to pay off their home early. Jane, homeowner, makes her regular house payments and invests $500 a month towards retirement over the lifetime of her mortgage. By the time she retires, she could have nearly $2 million. So Jane decided to invest rather than to pay ahead on her mortgage. Joe, homeowner, decides to double up on his payment instead of investing for retirement. He pays off his mortgage in 15 years rather than 30. But he has zero retirement savings. To catch up with Jane, he'll have to invest $2,600 a month. Now look at the difference of outcomes. Again, this is on Dave Ramsey's own website. To look at it another way, Jane will invest a total of $180,000 for retirement. But because she started early, compounding growth does all the heavy lifting. Joe must invest a total of $468,000 to have the same outcome, a $2 million nest egg and paid for home. Which bottom line looks better to you? So Jane, that took the route of investing, had to invest $180,000. Joe, that took the route of paying down his home early, had to invest $468,000 to have the same outcome. Now, this is Dave Ramsey trying to play both sides of it, because on his baby steps, he has baby step 4, which is to invest 15% into retirement, and then he has baby step 6, which is to pay off your home early. He has some questions of people like, why 15%? Why not after the 15% do I just keep investing? If it has a better return over the 30 years, why would I stop at 15% to pay down the home? A very good question in my mind. Now, listen to somebody on his show ask him that very question, and he goes through the baby steps, so you can listen to him here.
Checking account going straight into mutual funds, into a Roth IRA. Any money you have above that, baby step 5 is start to think about kids' college. Do you have kids?
No, sir.
Okay, then we skip that one. And baby step 6 is we pay everything else on the mortgage.
He talks about how, getting the mortgage out of the way speeds up the investments, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. The fact that you're spending all that time paying down on a mortgage that has a fixed return, and historically, if you've bought a home in the past 10 years, a very low interest rate. Very low historically. The fact that you're putting all that money and time into the mortgage rather than investing is going to give you a worse return, as his own website gives an illustration of. Now, obviously, there's some situations where in some situations it might be better. If you can pay down the whole value of the house really quickly, then you might be able to do that. If you only owe a little bit more on the house, you could do that. But for most people, I don't think that this is advice that makes much sense. One of his primary arguments also on this note here of paying down your mortgage early versus investing is when anybody points out that investing will have a better return over a 30-year period than paying down your home, his go-to defense of it is risk. All right, well, you're doing an archaic calculation of this. You're doing a really rudimentary calculation. You're not factoring in risk. There's a lot more risk to investing than paying down your house. Now, I don't actually agree with that at all. In fact, I think quite the opposite. I think that paying down your home early poses a greater risk for you and puts you in a tougher financial spot than investing does. Now, this is going to sound backwards to a lot of people, and so I want to explain this one in detail before I move on. Let's go to the drawing board here, and let me draw a picture of a home here. This represents your mortgage, and then over on this end, we'll have like the M1 pie or your investment portfolio here, and this will have all your stocks and bonds and blue chip dividend paying companies or whatever right here, right? All good stuff here. Now, let's say that you owe $200,000 on your mortgage and you have a payment of like $1,100 or something like that, right? Assuming you don't have a ton of money, you might have your 6 months emergency savings, okay? So he says to have that. You have your 6 months emergency savings. You don't have any money beyond that. You have two different options of what you want to do, and that is let's say that you have $100,000 over 5 to 10 years that you've saved up. There's route one of paying down this mortgage early, and then route two of building up your portfolio to $100,000. Okay. Now, if you choose route one, what you've done is you've cut your mortgage from $200,000 to $100,000, roughly, right? So your mortgage right now is $100,000. Now, route two, your mortgage was just paid normally, so you might owe like $170 on it, $180 on it, or whatever, because you've been paying your normal payments for the 5 to 10 years. But instead of building up a very small portfolio, you built up a $100,000 portfolio. Now, in these two different scenarios of paying down your home, one of them you cut your mortgage in half, and the other one that you've built up your portfolio, I think the riskier one is to paying down your house first. And the reason why is, let's say in after these 5 to 10 years, and you're in one of these situations, let's say you lose your job and you go through a minor recession, your work or your type of field that you're in, or you have some kind of a family tragedy or something that causes you to lose work for a year. Okay, so you've burnt through your emergency savings, right? In these two situations, look at the situation you're in with each of them. With this one, you've cut your mortgage in half, true, but does that really change the situation you're in if you're out of work and you need to still make your mortgage payments? Paying down your mortgage early does not change your mortgage payment. It just changes the end date to it. So you still might have another 10 years of this, another 8 years of it. But now you're in a situation where you need to make your mortgage payments, you don't have any income, and you can't take out a HELOC, you can't take out a second mortgage to pay for your first. I think that puts you in a very tough position, because if your emergency savings runs out, you're in a position where you cannot make your payments. And if you don't make your payments for too long, the bank will seize your entire home and the equity and all the money that you've paid down on it. Now, let's do the other scenario. Let's say the 5 to 10 years, same thing happens. You lose work and you're out of work for a year. So you've burnt through your emergency savings. In this scenario, you have your $100,000 portfolio, right? And you owe like $170 on your home. So your home payments are the exact same in both scenarios. Your home payments are the same. But in this scenario, I think you have added tools to work with here. You have a portfolio that you could liquidate some of the treasury bond positions of it, or some of the lower risk positions of it, so that even if there's a recession and it fell down in value a little bit, you have a portion of it that probably didn't fall in value. The investor grade bonds and treasury bonds. You could liquidate that portion of it to float your mortgage payments until you're able to find new employment or become back gainfully employed and get back on your feet. Having this money on the side, I think, is a huge security blanket to being able to float you through any of life's challenges that might approach in the future. Paying down on your mortgage early is kind of like putting all your eggs in one basket. Until you get to the point where it's totally paid off, I think it's pretty risky. Now, if you do get to the point where you can actually just lump sum pay it off, then that's probably the least risky thing to do. So if your portfolio was ever worth more than the remainder on your mortgage, you could shift that money over from your portfolio to your mortgage, and that truly would be the least risky thing to do. But as far as this whole idea that in every situation, paying off on your mortgage early is less risky to you than building up an entirely separate, well-diversified conservative portfolio, I don't agree with that. I think building up the well-diversified conservative portfolio on the side overall gives you a better security blanket than paying down on your mortgage in advance. And That's why. So I hope that makes sense. I know this is diving into it a little bit, but I don't agree with the advice that it's always better to invest, or it's always better to pay off your mortgage early and then invest. I think Dave Ramsey has a hard time with this. His blog post shows that the outcome's better if you invest. He has 15% on baby step number 4 before paying off your home early. If 15%, why not 30? Why not 20? Why does he stop at 15%? Is that some magical number that right after that, it's a bad idea to continue to invest? That 15% is great, but 20% is bad, that extra 5% is bad? It doesn't make sense. I think any amount beyond your emergency savings is totally fine to invest. And I think it's a safe option to do. Now, the last thing with Dave Ramsey that I'll go over, this is the thing number 3 that I think he gets wrong, and pretty much everybody in the whole financial world thinks he gets wrong, is the entire mutual fund versus market index fund. In this video, I mean, one guy comes in and he says, hey, a lot of studies have been done to show that mutual funds, net of their fees, perform about the same as index funds. And index funds they're more liquid, they don't have the fees associated with them, and most of the time index funds have been proven to be outperforming mutual funds. And Dave Ramsey, he does not give a good answer on this. You can watch this video and he drones on talking about a bunch of different things. I mean, even the comments on this highlight this. Are you serious? I don't understand how you dismiss every single academic study since the 30s. Every single expert who is not a fund manager agrees that index funds are simply better, including Warren Buffett. And that is true. Warren Buffett consistently says to invest in index funds. If Warren Buffett thought it was a better investment tool to put your money in mutual funds, he would do that. This is like I'm preaching to the choir here probably. I know most people are probably more towards ETFs and things that track index funds over mutual funds. But I wanted to point out the possible motive for Dave doing this, because this obviously doesn't have to do with getting out of debt. Neither of these options have debt associated with them. So he has to have a different motive for advising people to go into something which I think is a worse investment instrument. And if you look at it, he's constantly referencing these local providers like this SmartVestor Pros that he has on his website. If you go over here, he's associated with this group of investors, and obviously there's a connection here. Now, if you go to this page, he has on one part of it, this is his page on how do ELPs, these are his endorsed local provider program, right? So these are people that Dave Ramsey endorses, right? Now, I go down here, ensuring excellent service. Let me read one part of this. To be part of the program, our financial ELPs pay a flat market/advertising fee. Our real estate ELPs pay a referral fee. This helps cover the cost of all the systems. That's a nice way of saying that they're making Dave Ramsey very, very rich. These kickbacks that he's getting for sending people to these services, these real estate services and these SmartVestor Pro services, he must be making a fortune of them. Obviously, there's a motive to that. He says right on his website, he discloses that he has an affiliation with them, that they pay for marketing and advertising and they pay for referral fees. And it makes sense that he does that. Now, I actually don't think mutual funds are the worst thing in the world. I don't think it's a bad thing that he's sending people to that. But I do think it's a little that he is acting and adamantly defending them when most people in the investment world realize that index funds have a very similar return, but they're not making Dave Ramsey any money in that. And again, that's one that's preaching to the choir. He gets a lot of criticism on this point. So that's obviously probably the biggest one. Now, other than that, all this stuff taken into account is really not that big of a deal compared to the entire thing that he runs. Overall, like I said, his program is an overwhelmingly positive thing in people's lives. He gets people's lives in order. He gives them structure. He gives them motivation, which is a huge thing when getting out of debt, is to not just be droned away with the sorrow of debt hanging over your shoulders. And so I think he's overwhelmingly a good force, and I think he's somebody that's good to follow. There's a few times where I think that he gets a little bit too technical with the debt part. He tries to stick with that theme a little too much, even times where he's technically wrong on it. But again, overall, positive influence. So I don't want to try to paint a picture like he's a bad guy, he's only in it for himself, all that type of stuff, because he's not. Anyway, I thought this would be a quick, interesting video to do. I'm going to be doing my normal portfolio update in just a couple days. and going over some of the news like normal as well. So you guys can look forward to that. If you haven't already, be sure to like the video, subscribe, send it to your friends, all that type of stuff. We'll see you guys. Bye.